This is one of the coolest models I've ever seen. This is a Dreadnought done to the nines in Black Templars heraldry. The basis of this kit is a Dark Angels Redemptor Dreadnought with parts from Chaplain Grimaldus, Nemesis Dreadknight, the head from a Castellan, the better part of a Citadel Skulls box, Purity Seals galore. This ain't Yamama's Breadnought. This is a Relic Contemptor Dreadnought. This model was made by Kitbashed Powerhead on Instagram, an incredible maker and a big fan of the channel. Big thanks for building this guy up and sending it over. This is Hellbrecht, and it is actually one of 3 of my Hellbrechts. High Marshal Hellbrecht of the Black Templar is one of the coolest characters in Warhammer 40,000 and one of the most powerful on the tabletop, and I have quite a collection of hymns. But first, I gotta get started on this guy. I need to know what it looks like. I'll paint it up. First, to make things easier to paint, the sword arm is separate, and I want to keep it that way for now. I put some small balls of poster tack in the sockets, making sure I'll have plenty of resin and plastic to glue together later. Now for the Black Prime. I play Black Templars, but I don't just leave the armor primer black. My Templars are trekking through the desert, so I push the highlights like the sun is really gleaming off of their black armor. And so that I don't touch the model too much, I built up a paint handle for him. Sticking 2 of my paint cubes together, pinning one foot in place, and then using some double stick tape for the other leg. Then I hit him with a Zenithal white paint from above. Usually Zenithals don't work great on vehicles because they're just big boxes, but this guy is basically just a big Space Marine, so it did a good job of highlighting his volumes. And while I had it out, I also Zenithal the base, really blasting the bricks. To protect the Zenithal layer, I sprayed some satin varnish over everything. Sometimes a wash will damage a fresh airbrush layer of paint, so varnish will provide some security for a coat of my Templar soup. And that soup is a blend of Games Workshop Black Templar, Leviathan Blue, and Lamian Medium, which gives me the perfect blend of a cold blue-black armor, and I put this over most of them, missing his Aquila, shoulders, and weapons. This does a good job of giving me some highlights and shadows, and if this was a rank and file Dread, I would stop here, but this is Dreadbrecht. I want to make him perfect. I took a desaturated blue and mixed it with black and white to make a color that matches the hues in my contrast paint, and I used these to do some highlights. On the round hip armor, I made some reflections working in layers, highlighting up to light gray, and I used this color to do edge highlights everywhere. Now that I have the armor done, I want to embellish it with a couple of decals from the Black Templar Space Knights decal sheet, available at EonsOfBattle.com. I sprayed some gloss varnish over his arms and knees to make a nice glossy surface for the decal. I slid the transfer off the sheet right onto his robo wrist and a big Templar cross capping it off, and I threw another Templar cross on his knee. Then I used some Templar soup and I sprayed this over the decal to blend it in so that it matches the highlights and shadows in his armor. With the decals good, I sealed them in place with some satin varnish and moved on to the trim. This guy has a lot of trim, and I hit it with a base coat of a dark silver. I want to pick out the trim, but I don't want it to get too bright, so this base coat will help make it different from the armor but not stand out. Once the base coat was on there, I threw a black wash over all the metal. Then I hit it with a light dry brushing of silver to pick out all the edges and rivets, giving it just a little bit of a shine. The black and the metal trim are done, and Dreadbrecht is coming along nicely. This is, I guess, is representing Hellbrecht in the future. Although currently right now, Hellbrecht is doing good, missing an arm, but other than that, doing pretty darn good. But it's not hard to believe that somewhere in his future, he'll be interred in a Dreadnought sarcophagus. And I kinda have already put together Baby Brecht. This is a Space Marine captain that I kitbashed into another version of Hellbrecht. I used one of Hellbrecht's alternate heads from the Hellbrecht kit. I used a bunch of different Black Templar bits, and this model is the 2017 store anniversary Space Marine captain. So this guy is pretty spicy, and the reason he exists is because for a little while, Hellbrecht cost 130 points in game, and I figured out that I was able to build a pretty comparable character out of the regular old 80-point lieutenant, or captain. In the Righteous Crusade detachment, with the Perdition's Edge enhancement, leading a squad of sword brethren, this guy is remarkably similar to full fat Hellbrecht at only 100 points, which is what I needed for my list. And it's really cool because he still has the 5s and 6s are critical, he still gets 6 attacks with 3 damage apiece. Like, he's pretty darn good. Hellbrecht has come down a little bit in points, but that kind of just makes me want to run both, so I can have 2 mega combat squads in my Black Templar army, and maybe I can have Dreadnought Brecht bringing up the rear. Moving on to his shoulder pads, I want to paint these up like classic Templar shoulders. I make mine a little creamy tan, like the white paint has faded over the years of war. Once my tan base coats were on there, I glazed some white paint into the center of each shoulder. To get some dirty shadows going, I took some brown contrast paint, slopped this into the corners, and then came in with a clean paintbrush and feathered it out. I did a few layers of this, going slow to get a nice blend. While I had the brown contrast paint out, I thinned it down and put this over all the skulls to darken them and get some nice browns in the recesses. Then I started highlighting with a tan, hitting their foreheads, temples, and eye sockets, then doing another layer of white paint to get these really bright. Once I was happy with my skulls, I sprayed them with a satin varnish to keep them nice. I'm varnishing as I go because this guy is so big I have to handle him a lot while I paint. Now for his head, and I want to do something that'll harken back to the man himself, so I rebuilt my Hellbrecht gold armor palette, starting off with an olive color and then mixing this with black and glazing it in the recesses. Then I came back and cleaned it up a little with the original color. Then I kept mixing in a warm white into my paint and layering this up, highlighting until his helmet was nice and bright. I did some edge highlights of a warm white, picking out the details of his lenses, and speaking of those lenses, I dotted them with some red paint. Now that his martial helm is complete, the eagle is calling me. I started out glazing some tan, very thin so that the zenithal can show through, and then I put a glazing of a red-brown on the bottom half of the statue. This will be my base coats, and I want to do some airbrushing, but that'll require masking. I use silly putty over the skulls and armor to keep them safe while I airbrush, starting with a light zenithal white to highlight the shapes of the eagle. Then I took my red-brown color and splatter painted this all over to get a natural texture started, and then I did the same thing with my tan color, putting it on twice as thick. Then I grabbed my best paintbrush and started to carefully drag my brush across the eagle, laying down wiggly lines to create a marble finish. It was tricky to put this over the sculpted feathers, but it was important to keep it consistent. After my lines, I thinned down the paint a lot so that it was transparent, and I ran a thick layer of this over my squiggles to soften them a little, and I took a brown paint and reapplied my squiggly lines. I did a few more puffs of white paint to brighten up the top of the eagle, and then I dusted it with antelope brown, a dirty brown color to create a more saturated color. Now that I'm done airbrushing, I can demask, and then I took a white paint and did some fine lines running along the marble veins, and I did an edge highlight everywhere. I used some panel liner, dripping this into the feathers and the eyes of the eagle to help separate the shapes, and now my marble statue is done, I picked out the other details. Using reds for the wax seals, black and gray for the Templar cross in the middle, and finishing off the purity seals with a little bit of tan and a lot of white paint. And I kept that white paint going on his big quill on his chest. This guy is all eagled up. I finished off the silver trim above his feathers, and then I hit the candles on either side of his head with some cold grays. I was debating using some warm tans, but there's so much decoration already around his head, I didn't want to overload it. I've painted Dreadnought in Black Templars black instead of his gilded gold for a very specific lore reason. I don't think that if Hellbrecht was interred in Dreadnought armor, I don't think he would get to retain his rank as High Marshal. Even though the Dreadnoughts are very well respected in the Space Marine Legions, they're pretty low in hierarchy. As a Flesh and Blood Marine, he can command the entire Legion, conducting numerous crusades all at the same time. As a Dreadnought, he would kinda just be a glorified Predator tank. I really like Dreadnoughts because they are so grim dark. Being a Dreadnought sucks. Your broken body is permanently stuck in an intermediate-sized tank, probably in constant pain. Losing what little humanity and autonomy you had as a battle brother, literally turned off in between battles so that you don't kick the bucket before you can be used as a weapons platform with the mockery of limb-shaped weapons bolted onto you. And Space Marines are so indoctrinated that this is the goal. It's the highest honor to be put in a Dreadnought suit. The Imperium doesn't have the technology to make mech robots, but it's still useful, and so they just trick Space Marines into wanting to be turned into one of these things. It's pretty dark, but it's a lot of fun. Now that a lot of the decorations are done, it's time to move on to the business, the weapons. This custom shooter, I suppose, is a combi heavy bolter and multi-melta. Combi weapons are very old school, harkening back to the Horus Heresy, but are mostly extinct in 40k. I started off with a coat of Noble Skin, which is a warm black speed paint, and I did a second coat of this to darken it. Then I hit it with a dry brushing of a gray, using a warm white to make a warm gray. Then I edge highlighted everything using my warm gray color, and there are a lot of little edges in these weapons. Now for that melta. I want to try something. I sponged a few more layers of Noble Skin to make the ends look burnt, and then I dripped some white paint into the vents and around the seams. I used my airbrush to spray some white over these vents as well to make it look like they're glowing. I airbrushed a little bit of Bad Moon's yellow over the end to start a glow effect. I let this spill onto the rest of the gun, and then I glazed some Yandin yellow over the vents. I want this inner glow a little bit dark and orange. Melta guns are kind of the same as plasma guns, but for some reason shoot lava blobs instead of blue energy blobs. I dry brushed a little bit of black to darken the burnt melta shroud, and I picked out the camera lens with a few coats of red. Then some small yellow dots for specular highlights. And you know what else could use some small yellow dots? That's right, our website. EonsOfBattle is the place to find our merch, like the EOB dice, wet pallets, water slide decals, and basing toppers and bits. It's also the best way to support us with memberships. Each month, members get a credit that they can use on our new monthly train packs or any previous pack we have ever made. This month we have the Faraway Galaxy Bundle, a battlefield's worth of sci-fi buildings with a clever removable door and roof system for easy access. These buildings print easy and are perfect for cutting a battlefield into a dangerous urban maze. There is also plenty of cargo containers and barricades, including the XT6 cargo sled, for moving all these accessories around the war zone. This set is perfect for quickly setting up a thematic battle on any system, planet, or moon. This set will be on EonsOfBattle.com for the month of July, and then it'll be gone. Now for his other weapon, the Dreadnought combat weapon. Games Workshop kept the name pretty vague, knowing that they've made all kinds of different looking weapons for the Dreads to wield. I started out base coating the sword with a dark navy blue, and then I stuck on some painter's tape, cutting the sword in half to do some airbrushing. I sprayed on 2 lines of white, making them thicker along the tang, and then I flipped the tape and did the same thing on the other side, making sure my lines don't quite line up so it looks like a shimmer running down the blade. I used white paint to edge highlight everything, picking out the little Inquisitor symbol cut out and the nicks in the sword. Then I took a blue speed paint and dusted this over top to darken the white and pull it down into blue. I did a couple little puffs of white paint along the tang to make the brightest spots, then I went back to my nicest paintbrush and made some lightning bolts arcing around the blade. I was trying to match my little Hellbrecht sword to the High Marshal. And speaking of matching, I went back to my Hellbrecht gold for the handle of the sword. Although he's no longer High Marshal, he gets to keep some of the gold. After a few rounds of highlighting, the yellow was done and I picked out the wrap with purple. I usually make weapon handles purple throughout my Templar army. I don't know why. I hit the Templar seal with some red paint, using black to darken it, and then I threw a Templar decal right in the middle and the sword arm is done. Just a few little things left. I was waiting on the big shoulder shield to see what the rest of the paint job would look like, and I feel like what he needs is some more red. I painted it a nice bright red with light grays and whites for the cross in the center. Now my little dread is looking spiffy, it's time for that base. And that base is extra special. I airbrushed my Vallejo earth over top, which did a lovely job of tinting my bricks, and I did a dry brushing over top to hit all the little chips and scratches in the bricks. Then to lay down some texture, I did a sponging with this tan to get those bricks looking nice and weathered. Now to get Dreadbrecht to match the dry dusty scene of the base, I dusted Vallejo earth over his feet and ankles, and I dusted some antelope brown ink over the base to shift the color a little bit. Since it's such a big base, it was looking a little bit flat, so this will help keep it interesting. I stuck down my Hellbrecht, dripping some ultra thin super glue to keep him down, and I sprayed a little bit of blue speed paint around the point of his sword to make it look like it was glowing. The only thing left is to paint the rim of the base black. The Relic Contemptor Dreadnought, Dreadbrecht. A big thanks to Kitbashed Powerhead for creating this guy. I've never had a Contemptor Dreadnought in my collection. I've got a couple kicking around my pile of shame, but for the most part, I have the Castroferum Dreadnoughts, the old school, classic Dreadnoughts. These Horus Heresy guys are a very different design philosophy. They're much more of a mech than the classic coffin on legs, and it does harken back to the old Furibundus original Dreadnoughts from Rogue Trader. This guy looks really, really cool. Kitbashed to the nines. I have another one of these kicking in my pile of shame, and now I feel like when I put it together, I'm gonna have to really pull out all the stops for kitbashing and converting to make it match this guy's energy. On the tabletop, there's Legends rules for bringing one of these suckers. He can take 2 of any Space Marine heavy weapon, or 1 heavy weapon and 1 close combat weapon, and you gotta take the close combat weapon because you want this guy operating in all phases of the game. Now, I don't know if he's super worth it at 180 points, that's pretty pricey, but he does have a pretty ridiculous rule. Even in death, I still serve. The first time this unit is destroyed, at the end of the phase, put him back on the battlefield as close as possible to where he was destroyed with D6 wounds remaining. He gets to resurrect, and that is an incredibly fluffy, but an incredibly powerful ability. Honestly, I wish a lot of vehicles had more interesting utility rules than just sheer firepower, because even though this guy is not like a squad wiper, getting to guarantee he sticks around for at least 2 turns is really strong, and I really, really want to see what it does on the tabletop. Now that I've got this guy in my collection, I'm kind of energized to do some more Dreadnoughts, and I am waiting on Games Workshop to bring back in stock the Dark Angels Leviathan Dreadnought. I feel like the Leviathan Dreadnought, especially the Dark Angels one with all of the Gothic heraldry, would look really, really good as Black Templar, and it would make a great proxy for a Brutalis Dreadnought. And is there anything more Black Templar than a Brutalis Dreadnought? 180 more points for my Black Templar collection. I'm gonna have to find a nice, friendly, fluffy game of 40k to bring this sucker to. Thanks for watching.